No one expected what was about to happen when Karoline Levitt tried to humiliate Jasmine Crockett over her education. But they had no idea what was coming next. Right before we jump into this wild story, tell us, where are you watching from? You might be surprised how far this reaches. The showdown took place at Howard University's packed auditorium during a nationally televised youth policy summit. Rows of students, educators, and media personalities filled the room. Phones recording, hashtags trending, the air electric with anticipation. Karoline Levitt, sharp-tongued and self-assured, represented the conservative elite, armed with talking points and a smirk that signaled she wasn't there to play fair. Jasmine Crockett, raised by a single mother in South Dallas, was the underdog, battle-tested, a lawyer who had clawed her way into Congress with nothing but grit, sleepless nights, and a deep belief in education as a ladder out of poverty. The debate, whether public colleges should be free for low-income students. But for Jasmine, it wasn't theory, it was survival. For Karoline, it was just politics. And just when Karoline made it personal, mocking Jasmine's alma mater, her voice, her past. A single voice rose from the audience, and the moment that student opened their mouth, the entire room shifted. Karoline Levitt leaned back in her chair with practiced poise, fingers lightly drumming on the table. Cameras zoomed in. Students tilted forward in their seats, sensing the first real blow was coming. She turned toward Jasmine with that signature smirk. Half amusement, half condescension. "Congresswoman Crockett," Karoline began, dragging out each syllable like a teacher correcting a child. "I'm sure your heart is in the right place. But let's be honest, when you attended a school that's, how should I put it, more known for its parties than its policy, it's hard to take your views on education reform seriously." The room fell into a tense silence. Whispers rippled through the student crowd. Phones went up. Jasmine blinked once. Her expression didn't change. Karoline kept going, her voice laced with mock concern. "I mean, you're advocating for taxpayer-funded college, but you yourself took out loans, worked jobs, right?" She laughed lightly. "So, didn't that struggle make you stronger? Why rob today's students of the same character-building experience?" She turned to the audience now, arms spread like a TED Talk speaker trying to sell enlightenment. "We don't need handouts. We need hustle. And I think that's what these students want to hear." Some students clapped, lightly. Most just looked confused. Others glanced at Jasmine, waiting. Jasmine Crockett sat still, her hands clasped together in front of her, elbows on the table. She didn't look at Karoline. She looked at the front row, at a young black girl in a Howard sweatshirt, furiously typing notes with earbuds dangling from her neck. Then Jasmine turned to the mic. No emotion, just truth. "I'm glad you brought up hustle, Karoline. Because I started working at 15. After school, weekends, summers. I cleaned houses, I waited tables, and yes, I took out loans. You know why?" Her voice tightened just slightly. "Because my mama couldn't afford to send me anywhere. She was raising 3 kids on her own." The silence was real now, not awkward, heavy. "So when you mock my education, what you're really mocking is every student in this room who doesn't come from legacy connections. Every single person who's ever been told they're not enough because they had to fight harder than you did just to show up." Karoline shifted, a flicker of discomfort, small but there. "And let's talk about those handouts. You know who really gets them?" Jasmine raised an eyebrow. "Tax breaks for millionaires, corporate subsidies, your political donors cashing in on student loan interest rates while kids in this room ration meals to buy textbooks." A murmur swelled from the back rows. Jasmine wasn't finished. "So no, I don't apologize for where I went to school. I honor it. Because every class I passed, every loan I repaid, every bar exam I studied for while my lights were off from unpaid bills, that wasn't weakness." She leaned in now, finally locking eyes with Karoline. "That was strength, your resume. We'll never understand." The audience gasped. One student in the second row whispered, "Damn." Another clapped once, then twice, and then others joined. A slow, rolling applause started to spread. Not a standing ovation, yet, but enough to make Karoline sit a little straighter, the corners of her smile faltering. She quickly reached for her notes. "Well," she said, forcing a laugh, "I didn't realize we were here to trade sob stories." but the edge in her voice had shifted. The cool dominance from before? Fractured. Jasmine just nodded slightly, calm, as if daring her to try again. But that was just the beginning. What happened next changed everything. Karoline's smile had grown thin, but her pride wouldn't let her back down. Not in front of a national audience, not after getting checked by someone she thought she could easily dismantle. She straightened her blazer, leaned forward, and went in for the kill. "You know what's funny, Jasmine?" Karoline's voice took on a colder, more cutting tone. "You pretend to speak for the poor, but let's not forget. You make 6 figures now. You walk Capitol Hill with designer shoes and staffers carrying your coffee." She gestured toward the crowd, her words turning sharp. "You're not one of them anymore. You're a career politician, a Washington insider. And if we looked at your campaign records, I bet we'd find donors who aren't exactly scraping by, right?" Laughter rippled through a small pocket of conservative-leaning students near the back. Karoline pressed on. "So spare us the martyr complex. You're not a symbol of the struggle. You're just good at selling it." A hush fell over the room. Even some of Karoline's supporters stopped laughing. Jasmine leaned back, inhaled, slowly, and then smiled. Not the smug smile of someone about to clap back. A softer one, almost tired. "You're right," she said, nodding gently. "I do make 6 figures now. I do wear nice shoes. And yes, I have staff. You know why?" She paused. "Because I fought like hell to get here, and I'm not ashamed of that." She stood. That wasn't part of the format, but the moderator didn't interrupt. No one did. "See, Karoline, the difference between us isn't just politics, it's perspective. I don't believe people should stay struggling to stay authentic. I believe they should rise, and then reach back." She pointed out at the crowd now. "Half the students in this room are working 2 jobs. Some of them skip meals to pay tuition. Some send money home to help their families. And you call their dream of affordable college a handout? No." Her voice sharpened. "That's justice." The crowd shifted. Phones up again. TikTok captions practically writing themselves. Jasmine wasn't done. "And let me say this loud enough for the people in the cheap seats. I never claimed to be perfect. But I have never, not once, forgotten where I came from. My story doesn't make me a hypocrite. It makes me a witness." Karoline scoffed, clearly flustered now. She flipped through her notes and pulled out a printed quote. One Jasmine had made years ago about the value of personal responsibility. "Then explain this," Karoline snapped, waving the paper like a prosecutor. "You once said, people should take ownership of their decisions. So why are you asking the government to erase college debt?" The crowd buzzed, some gasping, others murmuring. A few thought Karoline might have landed something, but Jasmine calmly reached for the quote. She read it, then looked up. "I said that. I stand by it. But personal responsibility isn't a blank check for systemic failure." She looked directly into the camera now. "When a system is built to keep people drowning, telling them to swim harder isn't noble. It's cruel." "You want ownership?" she continued, locking eyes with Karoline. "Then let's take ownership of the fact that student debt has tripled in 20 years while wages have barely moved. Let's own the fact that the same banks funding these loans lobbied to make them non-dischargeable in bankruptcy. Let's own that." Now the audience was dead silent. Then, "Damn," someone whispered from the front row. Heads turned. A few students laughed, not because it was funny, but because Jasmine had flipped the entire attack on its head. Karoline didn't speak. Her eyes flicked sideways to the moderator, searching for support, but found none. She tried to speak again, but the mic caught a slight waver in her breath. And then, a hand rose, not from the panel, from the crowd. A student stood up, slim, glasses slipping down his nose, nerves visible in his shaky fingers. But something in his face was firm. He wore a faded hoodie that read, "Houston Community College." The moderator hesitated, then nodded. The student cleared his throat and stared directly at Karoline. "My mom works 2 jobs. I got into 3 universities but chose community college because I couldn't afford rent in another city." "Are you saying I don't deserve help?" Karoline blinked, caught off guard. The student's voice didn't shake this time. You think struggling makes us stronger? We're already strong. What we need is a system that stops making us choose between food and tuition. Scattered applause erupted. Then it grew. Jasmine stayed quiet, letting it swell around the student. Karoline looked stunned, caught between doubling down or backing off. But the next move from Karoline would be their biggest mistake yet. Karoline had had enough. Her eyes narrowed on Jasmine like a hawk sizing up prey. The applause, the student, the moment. It had all veered out of her control, and that was something she simply couldn't allow. She leaned into her microphone, her tone suddenly icy but precise. All right, Jasmine, since you're so passionate about debt and systems, let's see if you actually understand them. She pulled out a whiteboard marker the moderators had provided for visual aid. With dramatic flair, she turned to a chart positioned on stage, prearranged for candidates to use. In bold black strokes, she wrote a complex compound interest equation across the board, A equals P1 plus Rn and T. Here's the standard formula for calculating compound interest on federal student loans, Karoline announced, stepping aside. Let's say a student borrows $30,000 at a 6.8% interest rate, compounded monthly over 10 years. She turned, arms folded. Since you want to cancel debt, surely you understand how it accumulates. Solve it. Gasps spread through the audience. The equation was complicated. One most political candidates wouldn't touch live on air. Even a few professors in the back leaned in with curiosity. Jasmine didn't move at first. She looked at the formula, then at Karoline, who now wore the smug, self-satisfied grin of someone convinced they'd just won the game. The moderators exchanged worried glances. Cameras zoomed in, and then Jasmine calmly stepped up to the board. No panic. No hesitation. All right, she said. Let's walk through this. She picked up a fresh marker and began writing underneath. P is $30,000. The annual interest rate, R, is 0.068. It's compounded monthly, so N is 12. And T is 10. Years. She began solving it out loud, line by line. So A, 30,000, 1 plus 0.068 turned 12, 12, 10. That's A, 30,000, 1 5, 6, 7, 120. She paused, turned to the audience. Let's simplify. 1,05667 to the 120th power is approximately 2.0. She wrote it cleanly. A $30,000, 2.0 adas and 60,000, then underlined it. So over 10 years, that $30,000 loan becomes $60,000. That's double. Karoline's smirk faded. Jasmine wasn't done. Now let me ask you a question. She turned back to Karoline, chalk still in hand. If a student from a low-income family borrows $30,000 and ends up paying $60,000, how is that personal responsibility? That's a trap, a system rigged to penalize the poor for trying to do better. Then she delivered the kill shot. You tried to drown me in math to prove I don't understand the system. But I just proved how cruel the system really is. The room erupted, students clapped, a few stood up. One professor audibly muttered, "That's exactly right," under his breath. Karoline stood frozen, staring at the board like it had betrayed her, and Jasmine turned to the audience. Education shouldn't bankrupt anyone, but the reason it does? It's not because people don't know math. It's because people in power do. Phones were out again, hashtags forming in real time. Jasmine destroys Karoline. Math mic drop. Debt trap exposed. Karoline opened her mouth, but the words didn't come. Instead, Jasmine calmly handed the marker back to the moderator. And just when everyone thought it was over, Jasmine dropped a final bombshell. Karoline's smile was gone. She reached for her water, hand trembling slightly, and took a slow sip, buying time. The once razor-sharp candidate, who had strutted into the forum like she owned the room, now looked as if she'd stepped into a trap she hadn't seen coming. But she tried to recover, fast. Leaning forward, voice suddenly laced with artificial calm, she spoke into the mic. Well, I didn't come here to give a math lesson. I came to talk about leadership, real leadership. And frankly, solving equations doesn't change the fact that personal responsibility still matters. There it was, the pivot. But the audience didn't buy it. Murmurs swept across the auditorium like wind in tall grass. Even the moderator glanced skeptically at her notes, unsure whether to interject. Karoline pushed forward, sensing the unraveling. "You can spin numbers all day, Jasmine," she said with a rehearsed chuckle. "But the truth is, Americans are tired of the blame game. Everyone wants a handout. Nobody wants to work anymore." The crowd stiffened. A Latina student in the third row muttered, "Wow," shaking her head in disbelief. Another raised their phone, live streaming everything. That's when Jasmine stepped up again. No stage fright, no panic, just precision and purpose. She didn't go back to the whiteboard, she went to the audience. "I want to ask you something," she said, voice ringing through the auditorium like a moral bell. "How many of you are working jobs while studying full-time?" Hands shot up, dozens. Then she asked, "How many of you are helping your families with rent, groceries, siblings, while trying to graduate?" More hands, more murmurs. Karoline's eyes flicked around, suddenly aware she wasn't just in a policy debate. She was being outmaneuvered in a human story. "See?" Jasmine said, nodding slowly. "You say we want handouts. We want hope. You say we're lazy, but most of us are surviving on fumes." A cheer burst out from the back. And then another, louder. "Don't call us entitled because we refuse to be crushed by a system you've never had to escape from," she added. Boom. Applause. Karoline interrupted, her voice raised now, teetering on desperation. "Excuse me, I never said... That's not what I meant. I worked hard too. I've earned everything I've achieved." Her tone cracked with frustration, and the audience could hear it. But Jasmine didn't even flinch. She turned, slowly, calmly. "No one's taking that away from you, Karoline. But your success shouldn't mean the rest of us have to suffer. You climbed a ladder someone else built. We're trying to build our own, while carrying debt, jobs, and expectations you've never had to juggle." The air was electric. Karoline now shifted in her seat. She glanced at the moderator, almost as if asking for a lifeline, but there was none. Because in that moment, the audience had decided. Jasmine wasn't just debating. She was leading. Chant began. Soft at first, from the student section. "We see you! We see you!" It echoed louder with every beat. Karoline's jaw clenched. She tried again. "This is ridiculous. I came here to have a serious conversation about America's future." And instead, Jasmine cut in. Not harsh, just steady. "This is America's future." "You're just not listening!" Applause thundered. Even the moderator raised a brow in stunned admiration. Karoline stood abruptly. "You know what?" she said, waving a hand. "This whole thing has been a setup. I'm done debating someone who clearly came here to score TikTok points." She tried to laugh, but it landed flat. Jasmine didn't gloat. She just stepped closer to the front of the stage. "If telling the truth on a stage, to a crowd that's finally being heard, goes viral," she said, locking eyes with the audience, "then maybe the real problem is that too many politicians have spent years hoping we'd stay silent." The auditorium exploded, phones up, flashbulbs, memes already forming. "We see you," she boss Jasmine owns. The stage, she ladder V's load, and as Karoline sank back into her seat, visibly rattled, scrolling her phone in panic. Jasmine stood tall, but the final moment of truth was still to come. Karoline stood back up. Her heels clicked sharply against the stage as she took 2 steps forward and raised her hand to silence the crowd. A flicker of her old confidence returned, but this time, it felt more like defiance, desperation in disguise. "Let me be clear," she began, voice tight but projecting. "I'm not intimidated by outrage culture. I'm not here to be liked by every activist with a Wi-Fi signal and a grievance. I'm here to talk facts. And the fact is, this country rewards hard work. Always has. Always will." She paused for applause. None came. "So, if anyone here thinks whining about unfairness is going to fix anything," she sneered, "you're just proving why your generation is losing." Gasps, audible, harsh. Even the moderator looked stunned. Karoline pressed on, digging deeper. "The real world isn't a safe space. You want to make change? Stop blaming, start building. Because right now you're just noise." And there, It was the final swing, a punchline dressed as policy. The room fell into tense silence. All eyes turned to Jasmine. She stood still, her expression unreadable at first. Calm, centered. Then, slowly, she took the mic again. Not as a debater now, but as something more. "Karoline," she said, quietly but firmly. "You just called my story noise. Let me show you what that noise really is." She stepped away from the podium and pointed to the back of the room. "That's my mom, single parent. Never went to college. She cleaned motel rooms during the day and washed dishes at night. So, yeah, when I talk about struggle, it's not theory, it's memory." Karoline stiffened. "She taught me to work harder than anyone else, but she also taught me that silence in the face of injustice isn't strength, it's surrender." Now Jasmine turned to face the crowd. "And I will never surrender. Not to the idea that we're lesser. Not to the lie that we're lazy. Not to the people who confuse privilege with grit." Students began to rise to their feet, one by one. "You want to talk about the real world?" Jasmine continued. "We live in it every day. Rationing, groceries, working night shifts, surviving campus life without family safety nets." Now she turned directly to Karoline. "And maybe you don't see that. Maybe you never had to. But don't you ever mistake our courage for complaint. We don't want pity. We want a future, and we're not asking permission to fight for it." Silence. Then, boom. The first wave of applause. Then another, louder. Then the entire auditorium, hundreds of students, professors, even staff, were on their feet. A roar of standing ovation. The moderator's jaw dropped. Someone in the crowd shouted, "That's our voice!" Karoline looked stunned, frozen. No smirk, no spin. She tried to reach for her talking points again, visibly rifling through index cards. But her hands were shaking. She said nothing. Couldn't. Jasmine turned back to the mic one last time. "This isn't about red or blue. It's about truth. And if that makes noise," she smiled. "Then turn the volume all the way up." Mic drop, phones flew into the air. Hashtags lit up in real time. Noise is truth. Jasmine mic drop. Gen Z rising. Karoline folded cameras, zoomed in on Karoline, now seated, eyes darting, shoulders drawn inward, visibly rattled and defeated. The roar wouldn't stop. Even the moderator leaned in and whispered, "Wow." And then, just when it seemed like Jasmine had said it all, someone stepped onto the stage, a student, young, nervous, but with something to say. "Can I speak?" he asked. Jasmine nodded. The mic was passed. He took a breath. "I was going to drop out next semester. Couldn't afford it. Felt like no one heard us. But tonight, I'm staying, because you spoke." Tears in his eyes. The crowd fell silent again, and that's when the real shock came next. Karoline didn't storm off. She didn't make a dramatic exit or lash out with one final insult. She simply sat back down, quietly, defeated. The cameras captured every second of it. Her arms folded tightly across her chest, eyes fixed on the ground. Her once razor-sharp confidence now looked like a shield, cracking under the weight of a truth she could no longer spin. Even her supporters looked unsure. A few avoided her gaze. Others checked their phones, pretending not to notice. The shift. She had come to dominate the stage. Instead, she disappeared into it. And Jasmine? She didn't gloat. She didn't bask in victory. Instead, she returned to the mic. Not as a conqueror, but as a messenger. "I didn't come here to win a debate," she began softly. "I came here to make a point about who gets to speak, who gets to be heard, and why our stories matter." She looked directly into the camera now. "To every student watching this who's ever been told they weren't enough, who's ever been talked down to because of where they came from, hear me clearly. You belong, you matter, and your voice can change everything." The audience, still standing, grew quiet again, not out of boredom, but reverence. A hush of reflection swept over the room. "We're done asking for seats at tables built to exclude us," Jasmine continued. "We're building new tables, bigger ones, stronger ones, with room for everyone." She paused. Because in the end, intelligence, merit, and truth will always rise above arrogance and manipulation. A final round of applause surged. Not the frenzied cheers of a crowd chasing drama, but the slow, rhythmic clapping of people who had just witnessed something real, raw, unshakable, unforgettable. Cut to social media reaction. Wall and Nia for justice. Karoline mocked her degree. Jasmine gave a masterclass. I'm in tears. Mic drop moment of Harvard voices. This will be studied in comms classes for years. Respect, Jasmine Crockett. Truth teller. From now on, when someone tries to silence you, remember this speech. Voice is truth. Voice campus watch. Did Karoline just vanish after that? Because she evaporated on live TV? Cut back to Jasmine's final words. If this moment meant something to you, don't let it fade in 24 hours. Speak. Up. Show up. Be heard. She looked out across the packed auditorium. Because if we don't tell our stories, someone else will, and they'll get them very wrong. Then she gave the smallest nod. A quiet exhale. We're just getting started. Fade out, text on screen. Do you think justice was served? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Share this moment if you believe in standing up for truth. Subscribe for more stories where voices rise above noise. End 4-0.